Welcome back to the series, When Will the Church Win? I'm your host, Ilelemwanta Nomaren. After the religiously zealous period of the Crusades, the Renaissance would gradually change Europe's views on spirituality. The fall of Constantinople brought Greek science and philosophy back to the West. The invention of the printing press allowed new ideas to spread faster than monks could travel, and decades of plagues and wars produced major societal upheaval. Once the only pioneer of European progress, the Church gradually became more of a reactionary institution. For example, the Church had to respond to Galileo's telescopic observations in 1610, which confirmed the Copernican view that the Earth revolved around the Sun. For centuries, Church belief was the opposite, and when Galileo refused to recant, his works were banned and he was placed under house arrest as a part of the Roman Inquisition. Before his arrest, however, he tried to reconcile his discoveries with religious doctrine in a letter to his friend Benedetto Castelli. Here to discuss his theological arguments is our spiritual analyst, Ilelemwanta Nomaren. Mr. Nomaren, welcome again.
Thanks for having me.
One of Galileo's arguments is that if a biblical passage seems to incorrectly describe a natural phenomenon, it is probably not meant to be taken literally. He says, I should have added only that, though the scripture cannot err, nevertheless some of its interpreters and expositors can sometimes err in various ways. One of these would be very serious and very frequent, namely to want to limit oneself always to the literal meaning of the words, for there would thus emerge not only various contradictions, but also serious heresies and blasphemies. Indeed, a major problem in biblical interpretation is how literal certain passages should be explained. How literally should we take the Bible?
Galileo was right, I think, in stating that literal interpretation of scriptural text is very often a dangerous practice and will likely lead you to the wrong conclusions. I myself have come across many instances in scripture in which a metaphorical or allegorical interpretation is necessary to extract the correct meaning. A very good example of this that I'm pretty sure your viewers have come across before is the description of the beast in Revelation chapter 13. We would be very unwise to think that John was actually describing a physical beast that would be roaming the earth, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and that people would be getting the mark of this weird animal. Rather, the beast in Revelation chapter 13 is describing a time in human history in which man would lose their ability to think spiritually, and they would begin to act without sense. And that's what we're seeing today among many of today's politicians and their policies that just don't make sense anymore, both in a political sense and in a spiritual sense. Additionally, people now believe that God doesn't exist anymore, which in the eyes of God and the angels is so senseless and stupid. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God, to quote Psalm 14 verse 1. Stupidity in the Bible is often described using beasts because they often act without reason. For example, in Psalm 73 verse 22, the psalmist said that he was as a beast before God because he acted foolishly.
Okay, so if we can't take the Bible literally a lot of the time, is there even a place for the Bible in discussion of natural phenomena?
What do you mean natural phenomena? Do you mean the natural world?
Yeah.
To a certain degree, for example, the idea that the earth is flat was disproved by scientists like Galileo, but the Bible had disproven it way before they had even gotten to it. Isaiah referred to the circle of the earth in Isaiah chapter 40 verse 22, and Job commented similarly in Job chapter 26 verse 7 that the earth hangs upon nothing. We also see many commentaries on various animal species like eagles, cormorants, oxes, and the like. But remember, the Bible is not here to teach us the intricacies of why God designed the physical environment the way he did, why God made different species or why God made the earth revolve around the sun and not the other way around. The Bible is meant to teach us about God and the spirit world and the relationship it has to the natural world. To be very honest with you, many aspects of the physical environment matter little. What's important to God is that the system he has created is sustaining life on earth, whichever way it works.
So Christians should stop trying to reconcile the Bible with science then? Galileo says, I should think it would be prudent not to allow anyone to oblige scriptural passages to have to maintain the truth of any physical conclusions whose contrary could ever be proved to us by the senses and demonstrative and necessary reasons.
Yeah, I was waiting to hear this question. You see, a lot of Christians make the mistake of trying to reconcile science with scripture. The reason why that's a mistake is because, as Paul said, there are two realms of existence. There's the natural world and there's the spiritual world. He said the same thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 44, but differently, saying that there's a natural body and a spiritual body. The spirit world does not operate on the rules of the physical world, and vice versa. So we cannot be using physical principles or laws like gravity or superposition or even time to be judging spiritual concepts.
Interesting. So that means then that...
And let me add that Paul warned us against confusing the wisdom of this world with the wisdom of God.
What do you mean the wisdom of this world and the wisdom of God?
I mean that we have to know where the limits of science are and not get caught in many of those creationism debates where Christians dabble into unfruitful and unnecessary squabbles with people who simply have the inability to understand spiritual things. I quote him, he said, "Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of this world, and not after Christ." That's Paul in Colossians chapter 2, verse 8.
Yeah, I don't understand why Christians keep getting into these arguments. But then again, Pope Leo XIII asked theologians to reconcile all scientific discoveries with Scripture. Is this even possible?
For starters, that scientists discover something doesn't mean it's true. Humans have been wrong about a lot of things, and humans can never really know when they've stumbled on what they will forever hold as truth. Weren't there scientists at a time who believed that the earth was flat? They probably felt so correct in their beliefs, in fact as correct as we feel now, even though we've proven they were wrong. So I don't trust what scientists say with absolute truth, because they'll later change their mind and say it's something else. As Jeremiah the prophet said, "The way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps," according to Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 23.
So if science and faith are such separate domains, why do creationists and evolutionists keep fighting each other? Hundreds of years after Galileo's dispute, the church has just quietly accepted the doctrine of heliocentrism. What was the point of the conflict?
Well, it's because not all Christians remember Paul's advice in Titus chapter 3, verse 9 to not engage in debates that are, quote, unprofitable and vain. I myself sometimes forget that and begin to chase shadows and engaging in useless debates with unbelievers. You see, this is why what Jesus Christ said in John chapter 6, verse 44 is so true, that no man can come to God except God invites him. There is a great gulf fixed between people of faith and people of science, according to Luke chapter 16, verse 26. And this is a spiritual issue, not a literal one. I cannot convince an atheist to believe in God, because belief is an act of God. And if I am worth my sword as a Christian, an atheist can only make his mouth. He cannot convince me against my beliefs. That is just the truth.
Hopefully, this attitude will convince Christians and atheists to not debate these issues as much in the future. It's not like Galileo and the church of his time ended up changing the other's mind. But thank you, Mr. Nomaren, for your analysis. So, viewers, that ends our episode on Galileo and heliocentrism. The next episode is going to look at the Great Enlightenment. Be sure to check that episode out as we continue this series. Like this video, hit the subscribe button, and share it with others who are also wondering, when will the church win?